Let me ask you something. What's the most ridiculous bill you've ever had to pay? Was it your cable company charging you $200 for channels you don't even watch? Or maybe Uber Eats hitting you with a $17 delivery fee because you dared to order fries at midnight? Well, let me tell you, none of that even comes close to the HOA at Mandarin Lakes in Florida. These geniuses decided to hike monthly fees up to a staggering $350. And when homeowners questioned it, oh no, the HOA didn't bring spreadsheets. They brought the cops. Welcome to HOA land, where your neighborhood board thinks they're running the Pentagon and every homeowner is just a soldier waiting to be fined. Fact 1, the fee hike bombshell. Picture this. You're sitting at your kitchen table, sipping your morning coffee, trying to figure out how to stretch your paycheck between groceries, gas, and your kids' soccer cleats. Suddenly, you open your HOA's latest letter, and it says, surprise! Your monthly fee is now $350, effective immediately. Pay up or else. That's not a typo, not a gradual increase, not a polite request. Nope, straight up, cough it up, neighbor. Now let's put this into perspective. $350 is half a car payment on a brand new SUV, 2 Costco hauls stacked to the ceiling, enough Taco Bell to feed a college frat for a week. And homeowners aren't getting any of those perks. They're just paying for the right to live in their own house. Here's the kicker. This wasn't even the first increase. This was the second hike in less than a year. Imagine your Netflix doubling twice in 1 year. You'd throw your remote at the TV and start pirating episodes like it's 2008. But this isn't about movies. This is about families already juggling bills, now being told their neighborhood wants champagne money when they can barely afford boxed wine. And if you think $350 was bad enough, just wait until you hear about the fees residents were paying for things that didn't even exist anymore. So here's where it gets truly comical. Residents discovered they were still paying insurance for HOA security cars, except the cars didn't exist anymore. You heard that right. The cars had been replaced with golf carts. Golf carts. Now, no disrespect to golf carts. They're fun on a Sunday, great for zipping around retirement communities, maybe even tolerable for hauling groceries from the driveway to the kitchen. But patrolling a neighborhood with one? That's like swapping out your home security system for a chihuahua in a superhero cape. Cute, but not exactly effective. Yet every month, homeowners were still getting charged as if the old cars were revving around the block, keeping them safe. It's like paying for Netflix after they've already canceled your account, except instead of a reminder email, you get a nastygram threatening foreclosure. So people started asking questions. Logical ones. Where did the old cars go? Why are we still paying insurance for them? Who exactly is pocketing the difference? But when residents pressed the board for answers, the board suddenly got stage fright. No clear explanations, just vague deflections and a look that said, move along. Nothing to see here. And speaking of not wanting to answer questions, when homeowners finally confronted the board, things went from suspicious to straight up outrageous. Because guess who showed up next? Not accountants, not lawyers. The police. Ah yes, the infamous HOA meeting. You know the drill. Residents show up with their concerns neatly written down. The board pretends to care for about 2 minutes. Then things go off the rails. But this meeting? Oh, this one took the cake. Homeowners filled the room, frustrated, desperate for answers. They wanted to know, why the hike? Where's our money going? Why are the golf carts costing us car-level insurance fees? Normal questions any adult with a brain would ask. But instead of engaging in dialogue, the board pulled the oldest, pettiest HOA trick in the book. They called the cops. And let me be crystal clear, nobody was violent. Nobody was rioting. These were moms, dads, and retirees asking about their bills. The only crime in that room was the HOA's budget math. But when the police arrived, the vibe shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't a neighborhood discussion, it was intimidation. The unspoken message was loud and clear. Challenge us, and we'll treat you like criminals. Imagine paying $350 a month just to be told you can't even speak up about it. It's like tipping your waiter $100 and then being told you're not allowed to ask for water. Now you might think, okay, the fees are high, the cars are ghost bills, the meeting was chaos. But maybe at least the neighborhood looks amazing, right? Wrong. Buckle up, because the list of what residents are actually paying for is enough to make your blood boil. So, what do you get for $350 a month at Mandarin Lakes? Let me paint you a picture. Crumbling amenities, trash piling up, broken playgrounds, and crime rates climbing faster than the fees. That's right. Families paying sky-high dues still had to deal with violent incidents in the neighborhood. Security was a joke. Remember, golf carts don't exactly scare off criminals. And when residents complained, the HOA brushed them off with that classic, condescending line, "If you don't like it, move out." That's the HOA playbook in a nutshell. Squeeze homeowners dry, provide as little as possible in return, then gaslight anyone who dares to complain. But this time, the board might have underestimated their neighbors. Because instead of packing up and leaving, residents decided to fight back, and their rebellion turned the tables. Here's where the story shifts from depressing to inspiring. Fed up with intimidation and skyrocketing fees, the community organized a recall campaign to oust the board members. Petitions started circulating, neighbors started strategizing, and suddenly, the board realized they weren't the only ones with power. And this isn't just about Mandarin Lakes. This is part of a growing movement across Florida, and honestly, across the whole country. People are tired of HOAs treating neighborhoods like personal piggy banks. They're waking up, speaking out, and in some cases, flipping the script entirely. So here's the million-dollar question. If your HOA doubled or tripled your fees overnight, what would you do? Would you grumble quietly and pay? Or would you rally the neighbors and lead the revolt? Drop your answer in the comments because I know this community has stories just as wild. And trust me, we're only scratching the surface of this HOA disaster. The real fireworks are still to come. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, and share this with a friend who needs to know they're not alone in the HOA war zone. Because the fight for fair neighborhoods, it's just heating up. Previously on How to Lose Friends and Alienate Homeowners, the HOA at Mandarin Lakes jacked up fees to $350, called the cops when people dared to ask why, and kept billing folks for cars that didn't even exist. If you thought that was peak ridiculous, oh buddy, strap in, because the HOA wasn't just bad with money. They were bad with power. And when power meets paranoia, you get a neighborhood drama straight out of reality TV. So, let's talk about that police moment a little deeper. Picture this scene. A group of hardworking families is sitting in a community clubhouse. They're upset, but calm. They're asking basic financial questions that would make sense in any PDA meeting or city council. And then sirens. The HOA, instead of answering, decided the best way to handle the situation was to weaponize law enforcement. And here's where the psychology gets spicy. This wasn't about safety. This was about control through fear. By calling in the police, the board wasn't solving a problem. They were sending a message. We are untouchable. You question us, you get treated like a threat. Think about how insane that is. Imagine if your boss refused to explain why half your paycheck was missing, and when you asked HR for clarification, they responded by calling SWAT. That's the HOA logic here. But here's the thing. Intimidation works only if people stay scared. And this time, the homeowners realized something powerful. They outnumbered the board. And their voices were louder than the HOA's little threats. And the more residents dug into the numbers, the more absurd the whole financial setup became. Because the money wasn't just mishandled. It was vanishing into thin air. All right, let's put on our Sherlock Holmes hats. Because this is where things start to smell like a 3-day-old fish left in the Florida sun. Residents found out that the HOA was charging for everything under the sun. But the actual results? Non-existent. Landscaping, patchy grass that looked like it had been cut with safety scissors. Security, golf carts driven by guys who looked more bored than bouncers at an empty nightclub. Maintenance? Don't even get me started. Broken lights, cracked sidewalks, and a clubhouse that felt more like a horror movie set than a community perk. So naturally, people began asking, if we're paying champagne prices, why are we getting stale tap water service? And here's where the suspicion grew. The board's finances were a black box. Homeowners asked for transparency, for records, for budgets. Basic stuff that any organization should provide without flinching. But the board resisted, delayed, and flat out refused. It was like asking your roommate where the rent money went, and they respond by saying, "Don't worry about it. Just trust me." That works until you come home and find eviction papers taped to your door. And if you thought missing money was bad, wait until you hear what residents discovered about how this HOA was handling its so-called legal obligations. Spoiler alert, badly. Here's something wild most homeowners don't realize. HOAs have insane legal power. They can put liens on your home, force foreclosures, and drag you into court faster than you can say, "But I paid my dues." And Mandarin Lakes? They were leaning on those powers like it was their favorite hobby. Anytime someone fell behind, sometimes by just a couple $100, the HOA would threaten legal action, court filings, collections, fees stacked on top of fees. It's like getting hit with a late credit card charge, except the creditor also controls whether your kid can use the community playground. But here's the real kicker. People started to wonder if these legal threats were even valid. Were the filings correct? Were the charges legitimate? Or was the HOA banking on intimidation, hoping residents were too scared or too broke to fight back? Because let's face it, when you're dealing with cancer treatments, rising grocery bills, or just the chaos of everyday life, the last thing you want is to spend thousands fighting your own neighborhood board in court. And just when residents thought they'd seen every trick in the HOA playbook, the board pulled a move so brazen, it turned the whole community against them for good. Here's where hypocrisy enters the chat. One of the board members, yes, the same folks lecturing everyone about rules and responsibility, was found to be violating HOA guidelines themselves. Their lawn? A mess. Their property? Out of compliance. Their dues? Questionable. Yet magically, no fines, no police calls, no threats of foreclosure. It's like the HOA had two sets of rules. One for the peasants, aka everyone else, and one for themselves. And when neighbors pointed it out, radio silence. That was the final straw. People can tolerate incompetence. They can even stomach high fees if the community looks amazing. But hypocrisy is the match that lights the gasoline. And that's when the rebellion really started. Neighbors stopped seeing themselves as individuals fighting a board and started acting like a united front. And trust me, the HOA did not see this revolt coming. The recall campaign wasn't just talk. It was action. Petitions circulated, signatures piled up, and suddenly the board wasn't untouchable anymore. People who had never spoken to each other before were now bonding over shared frustration. It wasn't just about the $350 anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and the simple fact that homeownership shouldn't feel like prison. One homeowner even put it perfectly during a local news interview. "We bought homes, not sharecropping contracts." And that line hit hard because it captured what so many feel across the country. HOAs are supposed to manage communities, not rule them. And when local media picked up the story, boom, national attention. Suddenly, Mandarin Lakes wasn't just one angry community. It was a symbol of a much bigger fight, homeowners everywhere realizing they've had enough. So here's where we leave things for now. A board losing control, a community rising up, and a movement gaining momentum. But the real question is, when homeowners fight back, how far are HOAs willing to go to hold on to power? Spoiler: further than you'd ever expect. Stick around for the next part, because if you thought cops at a meeting were bad, wait until you see how ugly things get when the HOA realizes their little empire is collapsing. And don't forget, drop your wildest HOA story in the comments, because we might feature it in a future video. You ever watch a bad sitcom where the villains get more desperate every episode? Well, welcome back to Mandarin Lakes, Season HOA. Last time, the board brought in cops, hid their finances, and acted like kings in a cardboard castle. But now the whole empire starts wobbling, because residents realized they weren't dealing with leaders. They were dealing with amateurs with a gavel and a god complex. Let's kick things off with the HOA's so-called budget. And by budget, I mean a document that might as well have been written in invisible ink. When residents demanded transparency, The board handed over vague spreadsheets that looked like they'd been thrown together by a middle schooler on a sugar high. Whole line items were missing. Some numbers didn't add up. And then there were the mysterious miscellaneous expenses. Now listen, in any organization, miscellaneous is where you hide the coffee fund, or maybe a surprise pizza party. But here, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars under miscellaneous. Naturally, homeowners asked, "Hey, what exactly is this?" And the board's response? Crickets. Or worse, "Trust us, we know what we're doing." Yeah, sure. And my goldfish is secretly running NASA. But the missing money wasn't even the most shocking part. It was how the board used scare tactics to keep people from pushing further. Here's where it gets sinister. Instead of answering questions, the HOA doubled down on intimidation. They sent out threatening letters, warning that if residents kept harassing the board, fines could escalate. One family even claimed they received a warning about violating community peace, just for attending a protest outside the clubhouse. Think about that, you're paying $350 a month for services you're not getting, and when you ask where the money is going, you're accused of disturbing the peace? It's like ordering a steak at a restaurant, getting served a plate of soggy lettuce, and then being told you'll be banned if you ask for the manager. This is where residents started connecting the dots. This wasn't about order. This was about silencing dissent. Fear wasn't just a byproduct. Fear was the business model. And yet, while the board was busy silencing critics, they forgot about one little problem: Florida law. See, HOAs might think they're mini dictatorships, but the state of Florida doesn't exactly agree. Homeowners discovered that many of the board's moves, like refusing access to records and arbitrarily hiking fees, were flat out illegal. Florida statutes actually require HOAs to provide financial transparency. They're supposed to justify fees. They're supposed to give members access to budgets, ledgers, and contracts. So when residents lawyered up and pointed this out, the HOA suddenly had a "wait, you guys can read?" moment. And let me tell you, there's nothing scarier to a corrupt board than homeowners who know their rights. Because at the end of the day, no matter how many cops you call, laws still matter. But instead of cleaning up their act, the board made one last desperate attempt to cling to power by rewriting the rules of the game. Okay, picture this: you're losing at Monopoly. You've got no money, no properties, and your cousin just built hotels on every square inch of the board. What do? If you're the Mandarin Lakes HOA, you change the rules mid-game. The board tried to sneak in bylaw changes that would give themselves longer terms, make recalls harder to achieve, and grant themselves more authority over fines and foreclosures. That's like your landlord raising your rent, then adding a clause that says you can't complain unless you bring 3 notarized letters from the Queen of England. Of course, homeowners noticed, and that backfired hard. People who were on the fence before, now they were furious, because this wasn't incompetence anymore. This was blatant power grabbing. And that's when the community's patience snapped, because what came next was less like a neighborhood meeting and more like a full-blown rebellion. It all came to a head at one legendary meeting. The clubhouse was packed, tension sky-high. Board members strutted in like they owned the place. But this time, the residents weren't backing down. They demanded answers point blank. Where was the money? Why the bylaw changes? Why the selective enforcement? The board hemmed and hawed, tried to play tough. And then bam! One resident dropped a bombshell. They had proof. Receipts, documents, evidence that the HOA had been mishandling funds and possibly violating the law. It was like a courtroom drama, except instead of lawyers, it was furious parents with binders and a will to burn the system down. And here's the kicker. The board tried to shut down the meeting. They claimed it was out of order. But you can't silence an entire neighborhood when they've reached the boiling point. That night marked a turning point. The HOA's scare tactics had finally backfired. The residents weren't just angry anymore, they were organized. And the board? They were running out of tricks. But what happens when desperate leaders realize their grip on power is slipping? That's where the real chaos begins. Coming up next, retaliation, lawsuits, and the kind of neighborhood drama that makes soap operas look tame. If you thought cops at a meeting was wild, Wait until you hear what the HOA did next to try and crush the rebellion. And hey, don't just sit there. Drop a comment with your worst HOA story. You never know, it might end up in our next video. You ever see someone back themselves into a corner, then start swinging wildly at anything that moves? That's exactly what the Mandarin Lakes HOA did after the residents united. The board wasn't just on the ropes, they were about to get knocked out. But instead of admitting defeat, they went full villain meltdown mode. And trust me, it gets messy. The rebellion after that infamous meeting sent the HOA into panic mode. And when bullies panic, they lash out. Residents started reporting bizarre fines, like $100 for leaving a trash can out 5 minutes too long, or $250 for unsightly holiday decorations, aka a wreath on the door. One family even got a warning for improper lawn shade. Yes, shade. As in, the sun was hitting their grass wrong. Unless the HOA had suddenly become NASA's landscaping division, this was nonsense. It became obvious these fines weren't about community standards anymore. They were about punishment. The HOA was using its only weapon left, money, to make an example of anyone who dared challenge them. But here's the thing about playing dirty, eventually you leave fingerprints, and residents started connecting the dots. Turns out, not everyone on the board was comfortable with the shady tactics. One member, let's call him Mr. Regretful, started leaking information to homeowners. Emails, meeting notes, even screenshots of text messages between board members were suddenly circulating. And oh boy, did those receipts spill tea hotter than a Florida sidewalk in July. We're talking messages like, fine them until they give up, delay the budget requests, they won't keep pushing, and my personal favorite, they don't know the law, they'll fold. Well, spoiler alert, they did know the law, and now they had proof the board was abusing its power on purpose. And once you have a whistleblower on your side, you're not just angry residents anymore, you're an army with ammo. Fueled by evidence, the residents went legal. Multiple families filed lawsuits against the HOA, accusing them of financial misconduct, harassment, and violation of state statutes. Now, here's where it gets cinematic. Imagine the board, smug as ever, strutting into court thinking they'd steamroll a bunch of regular folks. Then the homeowner's lawyer starts pulling out documents, one after another, like magic tricks from a hat. The judge raised eyebrows. The board stuttered. And suddenly, the HOA wasn't the predator anymore, they were the prey. The lawsuits also attracted media attention. Local reporters started sniffing around. And once cameras show up, forget it. The HOA's dirty laundry was about to be aired on primetime. But while the lawsuits were burning the board in court, the real battle was still raging at home, and it was about to reach a boiling point. Back in Mandarin Lakes, tensions turned into full-on neighborhood warfare. The HOA doubled security at meetings. Residents organized nightly watch groups to document harassment. At one point, a tow truck showed up in the middle of the night to repossess cars that supposedly had unpaid fines. Residents rushed outside, phones in hand, recording everything. And here's the wild part. When cops were called, even they started questioning why they were being dragged into HOA drama. Officers openly admitted, this feels more like a civil issue than a criminal one. Translation: why are we here instead of catching actual criminals? The HOA's credibility was collapsing. Not just with residents, but with the police, the courts, and the media. And then came the moment that turned the HOA's downfall from slow-motion car crash to complete demolition. With lawsuits piling up and public outrage growing, state regulators finally stepped into the mess. Investigators demanded financial records, interviewed residents, and started looking into potential fraud. For a board that spent months telling homeowners, you have no power, this was their nightmare. Because while you can bully neighbors, you can't bully the state of Florida. Reports later revealed discrepancies in spending, shady contracts with vendors tied to board members, and thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't just in hot water, they were in boiling oil. Board members faced potential fines, removal, and even criminal charges if fraud was proven. And just when you think the HOA couldn't dig themselves a deeper hole, guess what? They brought a shovel. Cornered and desperate, the board made one last wild move. They tried to dissolve the HOA entirely. That's right, they basically said, if we can't control you, then none of you get a community. Problem was, dissolving an HOA isn't like quitting a book club. It requires majority votes, legal filings, and state approval. And since the majority of residents hated the board by now, their little escape plan was dead on arrival. At the final meeting, voices were raised, accusations flew, and the board president stormed out mid-sentence. Imagine a toddler flipping a Monopoly board because they kept landing on boardwalk. That's exactly the energy in that room. Residents cheered, cameras rolled, and in that moment it was clear the HOA had lost. Not just legally, not just financially, but morally. Their authority was gone. The cops, the courts, the state, they'd all seen enough. The board's empire had crumbled, their scare tactics exposed, their secrets dragged into the light. But what happened to the people who lived through it? That's where Part 5 takes us. The aftermath, the victories, and the lessons every homeowner needs to know before signing another HOA agreement. Stick around, because the ending of the saga might just restore your faith in karma. And if you've ever gone head-to-head with your HOA, I want to hear about it in the comments. Who knows, your story could be the next feature on this channel. They say what goes around comes around. Well, in Mandarin Lakes, the HOA sent out fines, threats, and intimidation. What came back? Lawsuits, regulators, and karma hitting harder than Florida humidity in August. But what happened after the dust settled? Let's break down the aftermath of one of the wildest HOA meltdowns ever caught on camera. When the board's empire finally collapsed, residents wasted no time stepping in. A new election was held, and this time the board looked very different. No more power-hungry micromanagers. Instead, actual neighbors, teachers, nurses, small business owners, people with a stake in making Mandarin Lakes livable again. The new leadership slashed fees, killed bogus fines, and opened up financial records for everyone to see. Transparency went from being a buzzword to an actual policy. Residents were no longer afraid to speak up at meetings. Felt less like an HOA and more like a community. Imagine that. But while the neighborhood was healing, the story wasn't over, because the old board wasn't done facing consequences. The state's investigation uncovered more than sloppy bookkeeping. Several board members were charged with misappropriation of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and in some cases outright fraud. Some had to pay back thousands. Others were barred from ever serving on a homeowner's board again. And one, let's just say orange, wasn't just the new black. It was the new HOA dress code. For residents who had endured years of bullying and financial abuse, watching justice roll in wasn't just satisfying, it was vindication. Proof that standing up, even when it feels impossible, can actually flip the script. And while the old guard faced their downfall, the residents discovered something powerful about themselves. Once the HOA dictatorship was over, neighbors actually started acting like neighbors. Cookouts popped up. Block parties returned. People who had barely spoken before were suddenly allies, bonded by battle scars. One resident said, "We went from living in fear to living in fellowship." That's the kind of quote you want engraved on a plaque. Even the police, who were tired of being dragged into HOA drama, noticed the shift. Instead of responding to HOA disputes, they were showing up for community BBQs. But the biggest lesson of all wasn't about cookouts or block parties. It was about survival in the HOA jungle. The Mandarin Lake story became a cautionary tale. Local news covered it. Neighboring communities took notice. And future homeowners started asking one very important question before signing on the dotted line. What's the HOA like? The top lessons residents shared were, always read the bylaws. If fees can skyrocket overnight, that's a red flag. Document everything. Pictures, emails, fines, keep receipts. Strength in numbers. One homeowner complaining is a nuisance. 100 homeowners uniting? That's a movement. Know your rights. HOAs love to bluff, but state laws often give residents more protection than they realize. And if you're wondering whether this nightmare could happen in your neighborhood, well, Let's just say the answer isn't as comforting as you'd like. HOAs across the US watched this saga unfold, and some took it as a warning. Others, they doubled down, convinced their residents would never fight back. But here's the kicker. The Mandarin Lake story went viral. Social media lit up. TikTokers reenacted the board meetings. Local politicians even started talking about HOA reform. The message was clear. The HOA era of unchecked power might finally be cracking. And it started with a group of fed-up residents in Florida who refused to pay $350 a month for the privilege of being bullied. So, what do we take away from this saga? Simple. HOA power isn't inevitable, it's borrowed. And when homeowners decide to take it back, no board, no fine, no shady contract can stop them. Now I want to hear from you. What's the craziest HOA story you've ever heard or lived through? Drop it in the comments below, because your story could be the next one we feature. And hey, if you enjoyed watching an HOA finally get a taste of its own medicine, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with anyone who's ever thought about joining or escaping an HOA community. Until next time, this is at Hoa Wars, signing off. Remember, don't just pay the fine, question it.